interesting turn.
Thank you very much for joining us for today's Pre-26 Nigerian Economic Summit virtual event. My name is Nkechi Obi, and I'm the thematic lead for the sport industry thematic group of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. Today, we'll be engaging several high-powered panelists on recategorization of sports as a business sector of the economy. What are the partnership imperatives, and how do we go about this? And this event is one of a number of pre-NES 26 conversations that will be exploring emerging trends in the horizon that would enable Nigerians to capitalize on new opportunities and build resilience by establishing the relationship framework that is required to accelerate the development of the sports industry ecosystem in the country. Now, I would like to do a little housekeeping before we get started, and I'd like to welcome in our midst the Honorable Minister of Youth and Sports Development, Honorable Sunday Dare, who's just joined us and missed a little of our previous housekeeping exercise. Honorable Minister, it's my pleasure to welcome you and to just slightly tweak the program for today. One of our panelists, Mr. Olu Akpata, the new NBA, Nigerian Bar Association President, has been summoned for national duties, and it's a summons he cannot turn down. But he joined us very briefly. He's joining us very briefly for 15 minutes, just to enable him to tender his apologies to the general public, the watching public, and the participants at this webinar, and officially hand over to his brother, lawyer, and SAN present to us. So with that, Honorable Minister, we crave your indulgence to have that little bit of business taken care of very quickly, and then we can get on with the business of the day. So without further ado, I'd like to call on Mr. Olumide Akpata, the President of the Nigerian Bar Association, to give us a few words of encouragement for today's program. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Please confirm if you can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
I know much of my technology this morning. But I thank you very much. I feel honored to be on this panel. I feel very much at home, of course, because I'm a part of the NESG family. Let me also thank all members of the panel, the Honorable Minister, Dr. Mosu, and please forgive me if I don't mention your name. Time is of the essence. I am so sorry, first and foremost, that I am not able to sit through this panel, and as Nkechi would attest to, this is a matter, or this is an issue that she and I and Chidoke Okoli have been discussing for many years, and I just thought that it was such a good opportunity for us to speak to the issues and begin to formulate an action plan with regard to the categorization of sports as a business, and generally taking that sector more seriously than we are doing at the moment. Unfortunately, some of you may be aware of some of the goings on in the legal space, and I've been called away to a meeting that I must attend right now. I'm glad that Leonard Nabuke Chiokoli is available and he's on the panel. So I am going to ask him to kindly deal with the issue of the legal framework that is necessary when we are talking about sports as a business, and what needs to be in place for us to effectively have a buoyant and active sector, the sports sector. So I'm hoping that Chidoke Okoli, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, will speak to those issues, in addition to what his initial remit was or is. But permit me to say before I leave that on the issue of categorizing business, sports as a business, generally dealing with the issues of that sector, can I quickly say that we must pay attention, and I'm glad, actually, I know that that's why I'm here, and that's why Chidoke is here. We must pay attention to the laws that underpin that sector, and indeed any other sector. We must pay attention to how we can ensure that there's a body of laws that undergird whatever it is that we want to do with sports as a business. So that and then secondly, more importantly, we must be sure that lawyers, there's a body of lawyers in the Nigerian legal profession who are receiving training in this regard. The master of all trades, the jack of all trades attitude really would not suffice in this scenario. This is a very specialized area as far as sports law is concerned. And so there must be a deliberate plan to ensure that we build capacity on the part of the lawyers who will now provide support to this sector that we want to take more seriously. And I find that in many sectors, the mistake is always made that nobody really pays attention to the role of the lawyer in the sector. Government, for example, gets up and says we want to diversify our economy. We want to focus on agriculture and solid minerals, which is a good thing. But I ask myself, who has sat down to talk about ensuring that the laws are in place, and then there are those, the practitioners, the lawyers are available who have an understanding of the sector. The same can be said for sports. We must ensure that there is a group of lawyers who are taking it seriously, who are interested in building capacity in this area. We must ensure that our universities are carrying along, the Universities Commission, the Council of Legal Education, so that the curriculum for lawyers in law faculties and the Nigerian law school, the curriculum is adjusted to reflect this reality that indeed as a country, we want to take the sports business or sports sector more seriously. We want to focus on it and ensure that it is yielding the benefits it ought to yield for this economy. I tell you what, we will always have a problem if we do not have that support from the legal profession, because if for nothing else, we will need to outsource that. Requirement, which will at the end of the day affect our bottom line, because we'll have to import legal services, and which we do not need. And which is why I always hold in a high esteem and admire my brother, the learned senior advocate Chidoke, who is on this panel, who has gone out of his way to ensure that he acquires the talents and the skills needed to give cutting-edge advice in this area. But we need more than Chidoke. We need a whole army of lawyers who can support the sector. From the point of view of kind of contracts that we need in the various aspects of sports business, from the point of view of dispute resolution, now, because disputes will arise in this matter. From the point of view of, just generally ensuring that we are organizing ourselves properly if indeed we want to yield benefit from this sector. So, ladies and gentlemen, my intervention here is to the effect that one, the laws must be looked at to ensure that we have a legal framework. Two, we must ensure that our lawyers are receiving the kind of training that is needed, because we will need the support of the legal profession if we want to make sports the kind of business that we think it should be, the kind of profit-yielding business that we think it should be, as we see in other jurisdictions. On the part of the NBA, which I am privileged to be at this time, Nkechi and Chidoke know that this is a song we have been singing for quite a while, at least at the level of the NBA section of business law, where we have a sports and entertainment committee, and has been up and running for a while. The guarantee and the commitment that I can give to you is that the NBA, on its part, will ensure that we build capacity on the part of our lawyers. We are re-engineering our Institute of Continuing Legal Education. We are about to set up a center for commercial law studies. And you can be sure that sports law will be a key part of the curriculum to ensure that our lawyers can come in there and build capacity in this particular area. But I think beyond what the MBA can do which is which would essentially, which would be in terms of scale may not be quite adequate. It is important that we engage with policymakers, those who regulate the education space, to ensure that our faculties, even if we designate 2, 3, 4 universities around the country, and say that their faculties of law will be offering sports law modules, that will go a long way, because we cannot be knee-jerk in our approach to issues like this. We must think long-term. Let us have universities that offer sports law, so that we are training the lawyers that will be part of the growth and the revolution in that sector. And as we know, in Edo State, that particular state government is already positioned to help to facilitate this transformation in the sports industry. I see no reason why we cannot leverage on that, get them to designate the Ambrose Ali University as a center for sports law, so that we can begin to build capacity, because we will not go very far if we are not guided as far as the law is concerned. And with these points, I would like to conclude. I would like to say thank you to the organizers for inviting me. And of course, I will not be at the summit to continue the conversation by the grace of God. Even though I have to exit at this time, Madam Moderator, as we have agreed, in the event that I'm able to wrap up the meeting I have to attend, I will log in again, just to be sure I hear how this conversation concludes. Thank you for the indulgence. I'm most grateful.
Thank you very much, Mr. Akpata. Thank you very, very much for that rather very punchy exit line that you've given. And welcome to the webinar on recategorization of sports as a business sector of the economy, partnership imperatives. I'll go very quickly to our co-chair, private sector for today, Mr. Udeme Ufot, who is a board member of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. He is the co-chair of the Tourism, Hospitality, Entertainment, Creatives, and Sports Policy Commission. He's also the co-chair private sector, alongside Mr. Gabriel Aduda, co-chair public sector of the Sports Industry Working Group, who in recent past have been midwifing the 2020 draft National Sports Industry Policy. Mr. Ufot wears very many hats, but today his main task is to officially welcome us to this event, and immediately after that, I will let you know who the rest of our panelists are. Mr. Ufot, it's my pleasure to hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Nkechi. Good morning, everyone. Honorable Minister, Federal Minister of Youth and Sports Development, Head of Ministries, Departments and Agencies of Government, Captains of Industry, members of the international community, gentlemen of the President, distinguished ladies. I am proud to welcome you. This year we to engage stakeholders in a big demonstration for action to shape strategy partnership to chart a path to recovery and build resilience for the country's economy.
I, I think we've lost our co-chair. I'm going to give him a minute or so to find us. If not, we would we'll take him sometime later on. The main thrust of his address was to welcome us here to the deliberations today. Deliberations based on key achievables, key outcomes. We think we're looking at establishing relationships and the roadmaps for implementing this process of recategorization, which is the first step, actually, in delivering sports as a business. So we want to begin to refocus people and minds to the fact that sports should be measured in terms of number and value of transactions. Whether you're dealing with the business, manufacturing, content development, or even athlete development towards achieving podium success. Everything is about what number and what is the value of the transactions in sports. Secondly, we're seeking that at the end of this exercise today, we would have been able to identify and establish the relationship frameworks to accelerate the development of the sports industry ecosystem. And then the third outcome we're hoping to have after we have had fruitful discourse today is that we'd like to change the perception of the general public, including potential investors, about the future of sports in the country, the new drivers of the sports industrialization agenda, and an industry-focused sports policy being promoted by the federal government through the Federal Ministry of Youth and Sports. All of this is hinged on three strong interlinked beliefs. When you drive demand for a certain product, it goes from being a mere activity to becoming an economy. Secondly, Nigeria has the population to drive the demand needed to turn the sports industry into a billion-dollar economy. And thirdly, the future of sports in particular, and Nigeria in general, lies in our ability to convert our infrastructure deficit into investment opportunities. So without further ado, I'm sure the minister, the Honorable Minister, Federal Ministry of Youth and Sports, is itching to tell us why the recategorization. But more importantly, we would hear from him. We would hear from money people I like calling money people. We invited Mr. Tony Okpanachi, Managing Director, CEO of Development Bank of Nigeria, and he's represented here today by Mrs. Arume Ugoroje Shekiri, the head of the Monitoring and Evaluation Department, who is going to talk to us about finance and investment models for the development of the sports industry value chain. Then we would hear from Engineer Habu Gumel, President, Nigeria Olympic Committee, who is represented by Mr. Francis Obi, lawyer and President of the Badminton Federation of Nigeria, second Vice President of the Nigerian Olympic Committee, and also a member of the Badminton Confederation of Africa. He will be talking to us about what are the contributions of national sports federations as industry development arrowheads. How do we create markets for goods and services through mass participation strategies? And how a vibrant industry assists quality athletes development programs. Then we would hear from Mr. Chijioke Okoli, Principal of Delphi Law Advisory, on sports law practitioners as a significant contributor to the industry value chain, and with a focus on areas such as dispute resolution and intellectual property management. And he will also buttress and beef up some of the issues raised by Mr. Olumide Akpata, President of the Nigerian Bar Association. Before finally we'll hear from Dr. Yemi Kale, Statistician General, National Bureau of Statistics. The reason we've left Dr. Khaled last is that when we've spoken all the grammar, nothing can happen without an effective and efficient statistical framework for developing the sports value chain. And how do we assess the contributions of the sports industry to the national economy, since we have decided that every activity in sports must be transactional in nature. So when everyone has spoken their piece, Dr. Khaled will try to put some meat to the bones of how we measure what everyone has said. So, Honorable Minister, it is indeed a great pleasure to welcome you here and to ask you to speak to us on your keynote address on the significance of an industry-focused policy for the sports sector, the opportunities to achieve the government's political, economic, and social objectives, and why the recategorization in the first place. Thank you very much, and welcome to the webinar.
Thank you very much, Ikechi, and good afternoon to everyone, friends at the NESG, and several other speakers, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Do permit me to skip other protocols. I know that Ikechi has done necessary introductions, and I want to thank you sincerely. At the Interministerial Technical Session held in November 2019, I recall a reference made about sports in Nigeria not being categorized as a functional economic sector by the National Bureau of Statistics, NBS. That statement also identified sports as being categorized under recreation, along with arts and entertainment. That's why this morning I'm glad that we have with us the able Statistician General, Dr. Yemi Kale, who will be able to tell us more about categorizing sports as a business sector. You'll recall that sometime in July, the Federal Executive Council, after a presentation I made, reclassified sports from being recreation into business. And that has further accelerated our journey towards delivering a sports industry policy for our country. Today's meeting is therefore instructive and offers evidence to what we can do and what we can turn our sports into. Let me start off by informing us that the first step towards that agenda is the categorization I spoke about. Generally speaking, the sports industry companies or the sports industry comprises a diverse value chain of subsectors which enables the industry to leverage its opportunities and events as to deliver on business and social objectives as the case may be. This provides a pool of readily available individuals and corporations with the financial and organizational capacity to leverage the opportunities present in sports as a business. With a strong revenue generating asset, sport has the economic characteristics of a luxury good with an income elasticity above 1. Economists will agree this implies that sport production and services will grow faster in lower income countries than in a higher income country. Sport products and services can be found in many other sectors, such as tourism, insurance, etc. This means that sport can help specific niche sectors to develop and increase the value of the national economy. Sport is a labor-intensive growth industry and a source of employment with an average contribution of 2 to 3% in direct and 3 to 5% indirect employment opportunities. This is particular because it goes in line with Mr. President's goal to generate employment for our teeming youth and the generality of Nigerians. The new outlook of sports industry being categorized unlocks the following privileges, which include: 1, the conferment of priority status to the sector, which enables eligibility for incentives under the National Investment Promotion Commission and special funding mechanisms. 2, development of metrics for impact measurement and relevant data by the National Bureau of Statistics. 3, consideration for special funding by the Central Bank of Nigeria. 4, tax rebates and exemptions from the Ministry of Finance. And 5, jobs and employment creation, and also the whole gamut of social development. These privileges situate sports to be viewed and measured based on the number of transactions within the sector. Previously, we have not been able to track the inflow of capital investment in sports, but the new reclassification, under the new reclassification, the sport industry will be able to estimate the worth of the local industry and determine the number of jobs created on an annual basis. What then do we see as the business opportunities for recategorized sporting sector as a business sector? Let me pointedly note that Nigeria needs about $500 million annual investment in sport infrastructure development over the next 5 to 10 years, the aim of which is to deliver $2 trillion in annual revenue to the national economy. The potential for growth in the recategorized sports industry is tremendous, and it is capable of delivering on all indices of economic development. I firmly believe that sports will drive the largest real estate and infrastructure development in the country. Beyond infrastructure, there are investment opportunities in other parts of the sport ecosystem, which include manufacturing, media and technology, research and training institutes, athlete management and coaching, and many more. Right now, we have taken the vital step, that is, the government has taken the vital step of recategorizing sport as a business sector of the economy, for which we are gathered here today to interrogate. The next most important step is what we have assembled here to do in advance, which is a beacon to the private sector that it is not going to be business as usual for the sports industry. I'm confident that at the end of this webinar, we'll secure the commitment and buy-in of the various stakeholders, including but not limited to the Central Bank of Nigeria, the National Bureau of Statistics, Development Bank of Nigeria, as well as other leading players for a vibrant sport industry driven by the private sector. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and pleasure to once again formally welcome you to this webinar on the recategorization of sport as business sector of the economy, partnership imperatives. Thank you for listening.
Very much, Honorable Minister. It's always a pleasure to have you with us because you are forthright in setting the agenda. No no beating about the bush. I just heard annually $500 million for infrastructure. So in 10 years, by the famed 2030, we ought to have attracted $5 billion minimum for infrastructure. So when we hear figures like this raised, in gatherings and discourses like this, it begins to make us understand the gravity of what is at stake. That sports is transactional. And, I know I've said that like 3 or 4 times, but that is exactly how we've got to look at what we're talking about today. So the one thing that jumped out at me is $500 million, and because that is the one thing, and I'm glad that's the one thing that jumped out at me, because we're about to find out how we're going to get the $500 million minimum to put into the development of infrastructure, ergo the development of the industry value chain. So without much beating around the bush, I'd like to call on Mrs. Arume Igoroje-Shekiri, who is the head monitoring and evaluation department of the Development Bank of Nigeria, and she's representing her managing director, CEO, Mr. Tony Okpanachi. Mrs. Igoroje-Shekiri, you have heard $500 million. 100 million. So it would be a very good idea for you to point us in the finance and investment models, both from a public sector perspective and public funding and private funding perspective, that the minister is coming with his band to see people, like he mentioned you by name, he mentioned Development Bank, he mentioned all of you. So chances are he's facing you guys in the next few months. It might be a good idea for us to work out what models we need. So we look to you to provide direction in that area. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Nkechi, and good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Honorable Minister. My name is Arume Shekiri. Like Nkechi has introduced me, I'm representing our MD of the Development Bank of Nigeria, Mr. Tony Okpanachi, who is unavoidably absent today. I'm very excited to be amongst these distinguished panelists. When we were preparing for this and we saw the topic, it's a new area for us, but we're very excited to see the different potentials that could come out of this industry. We're looking forward to more discussions around this and how DBN can play a role in bringing about the business side of and encouraging and promoting the business side of this industry financially. For all of you who are not aware of who DBN is and what organization, we are actually a fairly new organization. We started in 2017, so we've been around for about 3 years now. And we're the first fully wholesale development financial institution in Nigeria. It's a partnership between the federal government and international development partners, including the World Bank, AFD, African Development Bank, and the European Investment Bank. Those are the ones who co-own it. Till date, our mandates were strictly focused on MSMEs, but what we do is that we do not lend directly to MSMEs. We lend to the banks, who we call participating financial institutions, which comprises of commercial banks as well as microfinance banks. And we lend to them, so they are our primary customers, and the goal is to encourage them to lend to the MSME sector, who they consider very highly risky. And most of these MSMEs, some of them already play in the sports industry value chain. Taking the sports sector more seriously now. To date, we have funded, we've provided funding through our PFIs to the tune of 219 billion naira for over 3 years, of which of that 71% have gone to youth, youth-owned businesses. Also have a lot of them going to the trade and commerce sector, as well as trade and commerce sector, agriculture, arts and entertainment, which usually comprises of sports, but that's just about 1.38% of our total loan portfolio. So we have given out loans to over 90,000 MSMEs across Nigeria, across all the 6 geopolitical zones of Nigeria. So that's just a brief snapshot of what DBN is and what we've achieved so far. So I would like to go into the next phase is, because we're wholesale and we deal with PFIs, the role of DBN really and most DFIs is to provide additionality and catalyze the development impact objectives of the country, because, as you all know, the banks are profit driven. So they will always look to sectors that would give them that are less risky and will give them the highest potential to make money. And because the sports sector is a fairly new one, they will look at it consider it as a startup and very highly risky. So we need to find ways to help them channel funds that you need, the $500 million that you need, or the amount of funding that you need to be able to make this sector a productive one. So that being said, and I'm sure they're going to speak to those issues, Mr. Akpata already kind of talked about the legal environment, the framework, that is very important. That's just one part of it. And another thing is understanding the sector. The banks need to understand this sector, similar to how if you look at their loan portfolios, they go for the ones that they understand, oil and gas, all those matured sectors that they already fund, trade and commerce, but you hardly see, you see a very low one, especially with MSMEs. That's why we decided to focus on MSMEs as a bank. And then now the sports sector. So they need to understand the dynamics in this industry. And, and that's just part of the training that we do. So I forgot to mention for DBN, we have 3 core mandates. The first one is funding. So we give loans. The second one is technical assistance to our banks, as well as capacity building for our MSMEs. And the last thing we do is partial credit guarantees, where we help to de-risk the MSME sector. And we do that through our subsidiary Impact Credit Guarantee Company. So those are our 3-fold mandates. So DBN as an organization work with different organizations and partners to achieve those things. And obviously the reason why we do those 3 things is because we're a DFI, our main focus is development impact as opposed to profit driven, even though we're a sustainable business. So we definitely are looking out for job creation. We're looking to track value chain enhancements. We're looking for financial inclusion, women empowerment, youth empowerment. Those are our key development impact objectives. So going back to what would make the sports industry attractive to the banks, it has to be de-risked. So like what NISAL does for the agricultural sector, what Impact Credit Guarantee does for the MSME sector. Now we need one for the sports industry. We need an organization that their sole purpose is to provide partial credit risk guarantee to these banks, so that these banks can take up most of these MSMEs that play in the sports industry that need funding to be able to grow their businesses. Another key thing is understanding of the value chain that exists in this industry. The banks understanding it, even the businesses understanding the opportunities that exist, even the MSMEs that we currently fund. Some of them are already in this space, they're doing merchandising, they're already selling jerseys, they're doing things already that we consider, transactions in the sport industry. So in terms of funding, what we currently do at DBN, we provide loans. We're not, like I said, we're not sector specific, but we definitely make products that are tailored towards certain sectors. And we also provide credit guarantees to the banks. So for going forward, and in conversations with the Ministry of Sports and other key stakeholders, DBN can definitely come together to create a product that is specifically dedicated to the sports industry and MSMEs that play in that space, so that we're still staying within our mandate, but still being able to provide the necessary funding, because we all know lack of access to finance is one of the greatest challenges of businesses. So we'll be able to give you the right funding for your infrastructure development in that space, building of stadiums, selling of merchandises, TV rights, and we will definitely see I see the potential in this recategorization. I see so much potential when you compare to what is going on in Europe, South Africa, and other economies of the world. So that being said, I think my 10 minutes is up. I was told I have 10 minutes. I hope I haven't talked more than the 10, but I'm open to answer any questions that you may have from our end going forward. So thank you very much for the opportunity, and we look forward to further engagements, definitely.
Thank you very much, Arume. I mean, that was very, very concise. Your loan portfolio to us is pretty low, but I'm sure the Honorable Minister has taken some notes, and we'll be paying you a visit, I'm sure, very shortly, particularly in terms of, let's see how we go about setting up a de-risking organization or agency, such that if we are able to understand the value chain of the sports industry, we'll get a lot more people in, and maybe this $500 million won't look so heavy on the on the eye. Moving very swiftly. So we've talked about the money, practically from a public financing perspective. I'm sure someday we'll get somebody from private financing perspective to come and tell us what commercial banks, PEs and VCs would be looking at. So now, who do we want to use these things for? How do we bring in the end users? How do we situate our athletes in all of this? Because at the end of the day, sports, the final product of sports is that person you see running the 100 meters and hoping to get an Olympic gold medal, or the person the 11 people you gather on the field, and they're trying to either win a league or win the World Cup or win the badminton singles or doubles people or the basketball people. So what we all see is the athlete. The back end is what we've been talking about now. How do we ensure a seamless process for developing athletes from raw material to finished product? How do we engage the general public, and in doing so, use the concept of mass participation to drive demand for goods and services? Who should lead that? Who should lead in that venture? Who should lead that initiative? Who should lead that task? To discuss that for us today, we invited Engineer Habu Gumel, President, Nigeria Olympic Committee, which is made up of all the national sports federations governing sports in the country. And he has graciously sent us Mr. Francis Obi to represent him. Francis is the president of the Badminton Federation of Nigeria, making great strides for a sport that does not have that much high visibility, but can take us through what he's doing in his place. Francis is also a member of the Badminton Confederation of Africa Executive Council and the second vice president of the Nigerian Olympic Committee. Francis, let's find out from you contributions of national sports federations as industry development arrowheads. How is that possible? How are you going to help create, how do we get the federations to help create markets for goods and services through mass participation? And how does a vibrant industry assist quality athletes development programs? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Nkechi. The Honorable Minister for Youth and Sports Development, Mr. Sunday Barry, fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen. I would say that it's really a big, for us in the Olympic movement, it's a very major step to be having this conversation at this time. The Nigeria Olympic Committee, as we all know, is the National Olympic Committee for Nigeria, responsible for coordinating and supporting Nigerian competitors in the Olympic Games. It is also the body responsible for Nigeria's representation at the Commonwealth Games and the All-African Games. The NOC is mostly made up of the presidents of national sports federations and a few other bodies like the Nigerian University Games Association, representative of the military, representative of the Olympians. So being an umbrella body of the national sport federations, the NOC, of course, through the National Sport Federation, has a major role to play in the recategorization of sports as business by the federal government. Before I go on, I must say here that, for us in the NOC, this recategorization is a major step, it's a major achievement as far as we are concerned by this government. And we don't think it has been given enough attention at all. It's the first time it has ever happened. Sport has always been seen as an activity. But for the first time, the government decided that it should become a contributor to the economy, the national economy. And that is it's a major move. So what role do the federation, national federations through the NOC have to play? One of the very important ones, which we've heard being mentioned over and over again, is to promote sports as a lifestyle choice, which will help drive participation at the grassroots. This is a major role because the focus of sports being a business has been the increase in participation, which will drive demand for sport goods and services. That is the only way sports can thrive as business. If you don't have demand for sports goods and services, then there's no basis for that business toga. And this will in turn take sports from being a mere activity, like we've mentioned earlier, to becoming an economy. This is what the recategorization intends to achieve, and therein lies the future of sports in Nigeria. So for us, this recategorization is a challenge to every stakeholder in sports in Nigeria. We need to change our perspective as per what sports represents or what we see in sports. Now, I will take us through an example. During the lockdown, I'm sure a lot of us must have observed, a lot of people, there was a surge in the number of people who were coming out to run, jog in the morning, Eko-Link Bridge, Eko Bridge, through Ikorodu Road, and the numerous neighborhoods across the country. Everybody was told to sit at home and people needed to come out. I remember there was a picture or video that went viral of people who were exercising on the Bagada Oshodi Expressway that was being constructed. The question is, what were we seeing when such was happening? For a lot of people, we were just seeing more people coming out to jog and exercise and keep fit. But for a categorized sports in Nigeria, we should be seeing figures, we should be seeing business opportunities. A businessman will be looking at how many people came out. For everybody that comes out, I'll be able to collect between 10,000 naira to 50,000 naira, based depending on the quality of kits, wears, jogging shoes that the person wants to buy. So how do we bring about that increase in participation? That is where, and that's the role, the critical role that the sporting federations through the Nigerian Olympic Committee will stand to play in this, because at the end of it, when sports thrives as business, it is the sporting family, the sporting federations, the NOC that will benefit it most, as it were. So what do we see when we see such opportunities? And majorly, I will say also that the focus, with this recategorization, the focus of Nigeria towards sports has to change. Our focus before now has been on podium performances. We're always looking at how many gold medals are we able to win at the Olympics, how many gold medals in the All-African Games. Yes, there's nothing wrong with looking out for that and setting such goals and targets, but we need to change our focus. If we are looking at sports as business, then we need to look at it from the angle of driving mass participation at grassroots. So our focus needs to be in that direction, because what happens is there must be a flip in the pyramid. like a pyramid, our focus has been on the top. So now if we flip it, the base will be on top. There we encourage mass participation at the grassroots level, and of course, naturally, you have a wide range of opportunities and a wide range of talents that will gradually narrow down for you to get to that point where you get the elite, quality elite athletes to be able to represent and guarantee you that podium performance that you think of. So it will enhance and make it much easier for us to achieve, while at the same time meeting the need to have a viable business sector as it regards to sports. So National Sports Federation will drive mass participation by working with stakeholders like the state sports associations, the Ministry of Education, and the organized private sector to put together grassroots programs at the local government levels and the schools. And that's what we help drive this participation. If you don't go to the grassroots, we have the population, and the only way we can capitalize and take advantage of that is take it to the people. So this will lead to the creation of a huge sports ecosystem in Nigeria. An example I would say is my federation. We've been on a plan for over a year, going to 2 years, because ours was right from the beginning. We knew, because like Nkechi rightly said, it's not badminton wasn't very visible, but as a result of our efforts in the past 2-3 years, it has become a sport that is at least reasonably known in Nigeria. And we knew the only way to achieve more was to go to the grassroots. So we came up with a program to take badminton to schools called Shuttle Time, take it to the secondary schools across Nigeria. And in the process of planning, we started with looking out for sponsorship, which has always been the mindset that has to change now with this recategorization, because sponsorship is never going to be enough and it will never be adequate, not even with the current management structures you have among the sporting federations. So we went out there and we were like, okay, let's get sponsors, buy equipment, select some schools across the country, maybe like 3 schools per state. I will go there, introduce badminton, donate rackets, nets, shuttles, net poles, and help them set up the game. Now we'll take their games masters for training. We must teach them what they need to teach the children. And then we'll give them a time frame. After about 6, 8, or 1 year, we will now call them for a competition. The selected schools in every state, and from there, they qualify for the zonal, and from zonal to national. And whoever emerges at the national represents Nigeria at the All African Schools Championships. Well, it looks very straightforward, but of course the details, we sat down, and something now came to our mind, especially when the discussion and conversation about the sports industry policy came up. Private sector will not put money into something if they are not guaranteed returns. So, and sponsorship wasn't going to be enough. So we started looking at it. Yes, you give maybe 4 rackets per school to introduce the game and to start. You can be rest assured that by the time that people begin to hear about the competitions among the selected schools, and then at the zonal level, more people are going to be interested. And at that point, once you are able to arouse that interest, people are going to be ready to go out there to buy equipment. So we look at it. If you talk to a manufacturer of badminton equipment, for example, and say, come, this is an opportunity. Let's take the game to the grassroots. Yes, initially we'll give out some equipment, but what it will amount to is like planting a seed, because at the end of the day, you give somebody the first racket, which might not be, one of the best, maybe an average or the normal racket to give out. And the person plays the game, loves it, you get attracted, and you now buy into playing that game. The person is not going to expect that every time you are going to replace that racket for him. So what it means is that subsequently, once you've gotten that person's attention, he's going to subsequently try and buy a racket, maybe even a better one most of the times, because you want to improve the standard of your game. And there you are creating a market. So any business person will see something viable in that. And for us, that is the way to go. The national sporting federations would have to work with other stakeholders, like I said earlier, to take the game to the grassroots. That is the only way we can drive mass participation. Now, the National Sporting Federations, to be able to play this critical role under a recategorized sports, there needs to be a restructuring of the governance structure of the National Sporting Federations. This is to make it possible for them to operate business models like corporate organizations with proper governance structure. We are not going to be able to run, a sporting federation the way they are run now, and we expect a different result. No, the private sector is not going to be attracted because there needs to be synergy, and we need to be able to operate at the same wavelength. So sports must become transactional, like Nkechi said earlier. There must be an input and output. So it should no longer be business as usual. The mindset has to change. So for the National Sports Federation to be able to play their strategic role in the sports industrialization agenda, they must be fit for purpose to be able to drive the process. I'm happy that, in the opening remarks by the NBA president, he talked about training lawyers for this particular sector. So it's not just a case of jack of all trade and master of none. There must be people properly trained for it. So sporting federations must be prepared for this new, it's a different phase entirely. Sports is no longer going to be an activity, but it's going to be a business to contribute to the economy. So this is why the emphasis, if you take a look at the draft industry policy for a growing need, there was this emphasis for a growing need for a practical framework to improve the performance of national sporting federations to deliver on their responsibilities through the implementation of higher standards of sports governance, administration, and management, which will enable them to deliver a positive impact on the sports ecosystem. Another key deliverable of the National Sports Federation is to aspire to host major local and international events as a platform to boost the profile of their federation and contribute to national development. Of course, I'm sure everybody will agree with me that this is a very major one. And especially now that sports is being recategorized as business, it's an area where if you go to other clients, it's an area that other countries leverage on heavily, and they are able to maximize the contribution of sports to their national economies, which we have not been able to do as a country before now. And I'm very sure that with the recategorization and the national sports industry policy that hopefully will come in place, especially with the effort being put in by the Honorable Minister, this is going to take us to that particular level. So it has become increasingly more popular among governments and corporations, public and private, to host major international sports events because it serves the purpose of providing a major platform for the national government to utilize the soft power of sports to boost its image globally and attract positive attention to the country. Yes, that's one part. But this part that will really concern us with regards to this conversation, it also serves as a catalyst for major economic, political, and social cultural development in the country, especially in the areas of infrastructural facilities like stadia, road networks, and other social infrastructure, around which cities can emerge with various urban regeneration strategies. The Honorable Minister also mentioned this in his opening remarks. Now, tourism development and as a tool to impact on society through reduction in social exclusion and crimes within the society. Sports has a huge potential for employment of youths when properly administered. And this recategorization is going to create that enabling environment. When sports as an industry, as a sector, will be able to attract investment, then we will definitely be getting there. So, and to round up, I will say this. If you look at the 2016 Olympiad, we spanned from 2013 to 2016, covering the Olympic Winter Games in Sochi and the Olympic Games in Rio. It was put to have generated $5.7 billion US. Also, the World Cup in Russia added between 26 billion to 31 billion to the national economy. Now, the question is this: how much revenue was generated by Nigeria in hosting Koja in 2003? how much revenue was generated by Nigeria in hosting the under-20 and the under-17 World Cups in 1999 and 2009 respectively? None. So I'm happy that we have somebody here who's going to be talking about figures. We've not looked at those aspects because sports was never viewed as business. So with this recategorization and of course the national sports industry policy, I think it's a major challenge for stakeholders in the sports industry to have a change in perspective, a change of attitude, and the way we view sports has to change radically. And that is the only way we'll be able to key into this aspect of it being a business. And that's the only time when, after hosting an event, you'll be able to come out with figures to say, this is what we were able to attract. And this was what accrued as a result of us hosting those events. And who are those to drive hosting of those kind of events? National sports federations, of course, working with the Nigeria Olympic Committee. So I would say that we are most happy and very glad that this is happening at this time. And we'll be in a position, we're going to have to prepare ourselves to take up that challenge and play the needed role, working with other stakeholders to make sure that this whole exercise succeeds. Because when the sporting sector is transformed, the sporting federations, the Nigeria Olympic Committee, we are the ones that stand to benefit more than any other person. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francis. Thank you for that short but very cogent description of how national sports federations can play, particularly in the issue of mass participation, working with other stakeholders to create demand for goods and services. We always say, what do you see when you are looking at a child in school in terms of sports? What do you see? What do you see when you are looking at somebody in the, that's walked into the doctor's office and the doctor is saying, you need to lose some weight? What do you see? For some of us, when we look at those children in school, we're actually seeing a pair of shorts, a shirt, boots, ball, racket, something. And when we total it, we're seeing probably 10,000 naira per child. The thing is, and we have maybe 40 million children in school, so that's 40 billion you're looking at without, is it 40 or 400 billion? My zeros are all over the place. But the fact of the matter is, what you see when you're looking at an audience determines what you do, how you categorize that audience as a market. And sometimes what you see, what is a running thread through what everybody has said since we came on, is structure, framework. And most of these structures and frameworks you find have to do with laws, regulations, edicts, recommendations, supposed to be backed by law. So it behoves us. Mr. Akpata told us that you cannot be a jack of all trades and master of none. Francis Obi has just told us too, that there must be specialization in regulation to guide the industry, the relationship between regulation and the success of the industry. So to take us through what must happen as far as the law is concerned, it's my pleasure to introduce Chijioke Okoli, SAN, the principal at Delphi Law Advisory, to speak to sports law practitioners as significant contributors to the industry value chain, with special emphasis on areas such as dispute resolution, intellectual property management, even commercial contracts, because at the end of the day, it is about a contract between even athletes, a contract between the athlete and his manager, contract between the athlete and his club or principal. So Chijioke, we're going to ask you to, I'm glad to have Chijioke with me here in our studios. He's the only one that made it down here. So Chijioke, we're going to ask you to talk to us about how sports law, can be brought to bear on this recategorization. There's so many elements to it, but how can sports law meet those elements, particularly as they're transactional in nature, they're businesses? How are we going to get that to work? Thank you.
Thank you. Eve, you know,
Your mic, so they can pick you up.
the moment you're talking business, you're inevitably talking law, because you can't have any serious business without law. So what this recategorization is doing is to have a paradigm shift regarding the regulatory framework concerning law. Let me start with a fundamental matter. What the ministry has done with, in partnership with NESG, is to come to terms with the reality. We know that in the modern world today, sports is a huge, huge business. Now, if we start with the Nigerian Constitution, you see that the basis of that Constitution takes law as just a recreation. Because what we're doing here with this recategorization is that it will appear not to have been envisaged and taken account of by the Constitution. Why do I say so? You need a whole raft of legislation. But under the Constitution, law is what they call falls under what they call the residual list. Yes, in the residual list in the Constitution. So what this means, basically, is that regardless of all these existing laws, the federal government through the National Assembly will appear to be circumscribed, and I use that word advisedly, in its legislative competence. Because to the extent that sports is not mentioned in the legislative list, at a first blush, it will fall as something under the list, residual list. It will fall under the state legislative competence. But having said that, what is a lawyer if not a creative solver of problems? This view is rampant amongst the legal community, and you don't need to be a Professor Nwabueze, the greatest constitutional lawyer, to come to make this deduction. But I will say that this situation is the one that sees law in its traditional admoded view as just recreation. I will go so far to make the point that the moment we recategorize sports as big business, and to the extent that the federal government is not encumbered in legislating on matters that concern business, to that extent, what will appear at first blush to be a restriction that will have a way around it. So that this restriction is with the view, the old and let's say admoded view of law as just a recreation. The moment it becomes big business, you cannot say that the federal government cannot step in because it has control over the commanding heights of the economy. Having said this, the other point is that even without this, if we fall back even within the Constitution under the fundamental principles, fundamental objectives, and directive principles of state policy, that the federal government, it is not justiciable, as lawyers will say, but with this in mind, the federal government is enabled to intervene is intervened in the legislative space to do this. So having dealt with this fundamental issue, law as sports as a business has its own peculiarities, and those peculiarities are necessarily born to bear in the interpretation of an application of law or dispute arising on it. If you go through the jurisprudence of the European Court of Justice and the tough war between the sports stakeholders and that court, you now come to terms, you have terms like the specificity of sport, which they keep harping upon, that law is like no other business. It's business quite all right, but there are certain specific elements to sports. For example, you don't need a regulator in the business environment to stop you, to let you know as a player in the sporting arena that you do not, it is in your best interest that your competitor, whether as a professional football club, succeeds. In any other business, you need the regulator to, with his anti-monopoly, to make sure that a dominant person or a dominant player does not kill off the other people and take over the control. You watch the English Premiership because of all the big of all the big leagues, is the most competitive. Who is interested, with all due respect, on a relative sense, in the Serie A of now, not what it used to be, that before the first ball is kicked, maybe the betting people will not take money that Juventus will win. They've won like 10 years on edge trot. So they have that problem. And at the time, the biggest competitor in the German football league to Bayern Munich was the Borussia Dortmund. Bayern Munich helped save Dortmund from bankruptcy because Bayern Munich cannot play itself. So these are some of the little nuances that are brought to bear in the business model and necessarily the law. Now we'll go a step further, talking about this specificity of sport, where as much as possible, because once you have business, not just only business, even in domestic relations, disputes must arise. The challenge is that given the nuances and the peculiarities of sports, you would interpret Western legal principles against the backdrop of this, and which is why sports people historically have been averse to taking sporting disputes to regular courts. Some of the smartest jurists, they know the principles, but it's not enough to just know the principles. You must also understand the terrain and the practical effect of the application of the rules, which has been an ongoing contest and which has been largely one that when you have disputes in the sporting arena, it is taken before experts who know the terrain very well. I mean, we all know about the Court of Arbitration for Sports located in Switzerland. And coming to Nigeria, it's a very welcome development that already we have in place. When the process of putting in place a standing dispute, sports-specific dispute resolution mechanism. I mean, I can share a personal example. A young man who's playing professional footballer. He went abroad, came back. Somebody who was his agent, he needed to come back to Nigeria to reignite his career. And this agent is holding him down with an agreement that is absolutely almost like slave labor, tying him down. And he was referred to me. But the man and the young man and his parents were categorical, but they didn't even need to tell me. They said, see how you can resolve this without going to court. Because, yes, I spend all my time litigating, but I do know that you spend too much time in our cause, and that's putting it mildly. And then big business people don't want waste of time. Time is money. So even this gentleman came, and we wrote several letters to his agent. He didn't respond. We were in a bind. If we had a standing sports-specific arbitration or dispute resolution mechanism in Nigeria, in fact, it was one particular case where I was really saddened by the fact that we do not have a standing arbitration where we just go in a matter of 1-2 weeks maximum, we get it resolved. Because actually, what I got from what the gentleman had done, well, they remain nameless, but it is what has actually been outlawed by FIFA, third-party ownership. What he did is you can register a company, say it's a football club, but in all the name, I asked the young man, I said, this particular club that holds your license, where is their stadium? Where do they train? Zelsh. So it's existing on paper. He uses that platform, or they use that platform to now own players. Sign contract that this particular club owned the players. That was a way of going around the third-party ownership that FIFA stopped some years ago. Before, what FIFA did was all the federations, those who want it, like in the South Americas, could do so. But the Europeans who are so finicky about human rights said, no. They stopped it. But what I saw with those guys, but I was helpless. They told me don't go to court. But even if they didn't tell me not to go to court, I would not be very enthusiastic, because by the time we go there and everything. So actually, we're hoping that once these alternative dispute resolution mechanism that it is afoot now, which is part of all this recategorization, because you put it in place, you have a situation where people have the dispute, but they are sure that that dispute will be resolved quickly. Yes. So that's about the constitutional point, and then also the this other point. Now, talking about the other business environment, there is something, because if we're talking about law as sports as a business, we're talking about an aspect of commercial law. There's a concept of pioneer status for companies in Nigeria. My argument, which is not it's not so much of a stretch, that those companies that now come in to get involved in any sector of the sports value chain, especially whether manufacturing or other things, on the heels of this recategorization, will automatically qualify to take the benefit of a pioneer status. Because if a sector is a pioneer sector, as we are on the cusp of this new paradigm, then necessarily those who come in there be that.
Yeah.
And when you have the pioneer status, you are able to take your tax holidays for 3-5 years. So there's a lot going on. So there's a lot to do in terms of the legal environment, but already what is in place, there's scope for a lot of opportunities for the new players. Yes.
Thank you very much, Chijioke. That's in a nutshell, you know, just giving us just a glimpse of what the law can do as far as the recategorization of sports as a business and get us on the sound today. I'm very enthusiastic about the pioneer status incentive, because it's enough. We really are pioneer industry, regardless of the fact that we have been having sports for so long. But the fact of the matter is, as a business, we are a pioneer industry, and let's see how that plays out. But that brings us to our final speaker today, who I'm sure has been waiting very patiently, Dr. Yemi Kale, the Statistician General of the National Bureau of Statistics. Now, Dr. Kale's job today will be, having heard everybody, we've all said what we like in terms of money, in terms of mass participation, in terms of the law, in terms of the value chain, everything. There must be a way to measure the transactions in the sports, in this budding pioneer industry that we are, such that we get to know the contributions of all aspects of sports to the national economy. We would like to understand how models like the Sports Satellite National Account System, that is something that is used globally, you know, how with a fully fledged national input-output table, is this something we can develop, the MBS can assist us with? What are the things we need to do? What are the insights on data gathering and management? And what kind of statistical framework could the MBS create or suggest with other stakeholders for evaluating the value chain of the sports industry and assessing its contributions to the national economy? You can't do anything without data. So Dr. Kale, please let us know what your take is on the recategorization of sports with respect to data gathering, management, and statistical frameworks for ensuring success of this initiative. Thank you.
Thank you very much, fellow panelists and distinguished guests. I think the moderator left me last because I think she wanted to ensure that I did not bore the audience with the intricacies of data, so that all our distinguished panels could have kept them engaged before I put them to sleep. But I'll try to keep you as engaged as possible talking about data. I want to start by saying I'm delighted to be, and honored to actually have been invited to be part of this webinar, not only because the topic falls very much within my professional remit as Statistician General, but also because while working on this topic, it brought back some fond memories of my my past exploits when I was much younger in the area of sporting activities. I actually used to be very good at basketball. I actually was a member of my school's team. And before those of you that have met me say that as short as I am, how can I be that good at basketball? Yes, I was actually quite good at basketball. Very good with my hands. I could jump very high. I was also also in the football team, not because I was good at tackling or because I could dribble, but I was very, very fast. So I remember the coach would just put me beside the last defender, and then the long ball is pushed right between the defender and the goalkeeper. All I had to do was run there. And because I was very fast, I get to the ball very quickly. I just have to slot the ball into the net. That's all I had to do. So I had a very simple job, but scored all the goals. So that brings back a lot of memories. Sprints, marathons, long distance, I was actually very actively involved. And also I have to say that before anybody tries to test everything I'm saying by inviting me to any sporting activities, you recall I said used to. So I will definitely not honor any invitations for me to come and prove any of the things I've said about what I used to do many years ago. But with respect to sports as a business activity, and in particular the computation of sporting activities, I want to first say that we have to first appreciate that when we talk about sporting activities, in Nigeria anyway, we tend to think about the actual sporting event itself, whether it is a football match where we are more or less just counting ticket sales, number of people in stadiums and so on, or any income directly related to the event itself. But the broader definition used by most other countries that have developed their sporting industry in a much more advanced way includes all activities, businesses, organizations that are both directly or indirectly involved in producing, facilitating, promoting, organizing any activity, experience, or business that is focused on sports. Nowadays, as we all know, and has been said by several speakers, sports is big business for a lot of stakeholders. Not in Nigeria yet, but in more advanced countries. It is estimated at about $500 billion. This is the size of our GDP in Nigeria. And when you consider the fact that we are even the largest economy in Africa, it's kind of interesting that the global size of sports is actually the size of the largest economy in Africa. So it's really big business. In Nigeria, sporting activities account for about 0.005% of our nominal GDP directly, and I would explain what I mean by directly later. Directly under the United Nations system of national accounts, which is what is the international rule book for computing GDP. It's not something that NBS can change. It's an international standard adopted by Nigeria. So it's really only about direct impact of sporting activities to GDP. It only comes to about 7.2 billion naira, actually, of nominal GDP. So it's actually quite small. But of course, this doesn't include the indirect effects of sports, which are cuts across several sectors: trade, accommodation and food services, transport, broadcasting, publishing, health. Once we add the indirect effects of sporting activity GDP, it's a lot higher, probably between 1 and 2% of nominal GDP. That's basically about 1 to 2 trillion naira. For example, if you take into regard some of the indirect effects of sporting activities, households spent about 7.6 billion naira on sporting equipment and personal sporting goods last year. I would explain these direct and indirect computations later on, but the point I'm trying to make here is that it is still a very small business in Nigeria, despite the huge potential it has to be much bigger, given our population size, our youth demography, and of course our enthusiasm for sporting activities. I once commented during the last World Cup when Nigeria was involved that is sports, in particular football, is one of the few areas where there's grandpa, grandma, father and mother and father and kids all actually sit together to watch one program without anybody getting involved together. It's something that in Nigeria is a big deal, but it's something that we have not been able to harness properly. Whether they are sport persons, corporates, advertisers, or the sport bodies tasked with administering whatever sporting game it is, all of them stand to gain from the infusion of huge revenue from the various deals that have become the norm rather than the exception in many other countries. But we in Nigeria just have to get it right. We need to really see this as very big business and spend a huge amount of attention in harnessing its potential for job creation, economic growth, revenue to government, in addition to the basic entertainment and recreational benefits we tend to focus on in Nigeria. Now, in these countries I'm referring to where they've gotten their sports industry right and where it is big business, they spend a lot of time and resources on data and measurements and income coming out of sports, of this sports industry, these countries, because they understand, like most of us, that they need to take data seriously for evidence-based decisions. Now in Nigeria, given the low but definitely growing attention to data. It's not entirely surprising that we haven't given as much attention or recognition to data for sports more formally. You can just imagine that in the areas and sectors where we are focused more on, we still tend to prefer to take decisions without looking at data. Or those that want to show some data would first have decided the policy and then look for the data to support that policy, which is not the right way to do it. And if the data that is available doesn't support the policy, we tend to say the data is incorrect. And if the data doesn't exist, somebody will create that data to ensure that it matches the policy. That's the way we handle data in Nigeria. And this is even regarding, like I said, sectors that we're even more keen on. So imagine a sector like sports that we're not particularly keen on. You can imagine the low interest in the development of data. Meanwhile, sports itself, and you can name any sport for that matter, is one activity that by default heavily relies on data, heavily relies on measurement. And this is just the actual sporting event itself, and not even the associated activities from marketing to endorsement to trading to tourism and so on. There's particularly unlimited scope to generate and use statistics in sports, but we're not really there yet. So it's not entirely surprising that we haven't given as much focus, like I said, to data, considering first the limited demand over the years for data in general or evidence-based policymaking in general, and in particular as far as sports is concerned. And secondly, given the relatively limited resources to devote to tracking sports-related sports-related activities, even when the more dominant and key, the more activities that we focus on have not even been given enough resources to collect enough data. This is why I was delighted to receive this invitation regarding this event, because it marks, as far as I know anyway, the first major effort at driving sports policy and to harness the overall business opportunities of the sporting industry through data. So now that we are here, what do we need to do to establish a firm foundation for the sustainable production and utilization of sports-related data? And I mean not only to drive policy, but also to inform business investments and job creation, and ultimately to support Nigeria's socio-economic development. In light of the new national sports industry policy, which I had a look at, my objective here today will therefore be to share insights on the data generation processes and I'll give you a broad overview of the relevant statistical concepts, framework, and methodology for the sports industry and assessing its contribution to the national economy. It is important to recognize what I mentioned earlier and described as the indirect efforts of sports on the economy, because sports also interacts strongly with several other economic activities like I mentioned, including education, arts, entertainment, recreation, trade, publishing, broadcasting, even construction, even manufacturing, health, administrative and support services, finance, insurance, information and communication, and so on. By our estimates at the NBS, at least 33 of the 46 economic activities that show up in our GDP computations, which represents about 71% of the aggregate output, are related in one way or the other to the sports value chain. Of these activities, about 70% have direct links to sports, while about 30% are indirectly linked. This basically simply establishes how pervasive and relevant sports is to the Nigerian economy. With respect to measuring sports GDP, let me start off by saying that in the National Accounts Framework, sport activities and amusement and recreational activities are classified under arts, entertainment, and recreation. This aligns with the United Nations International Standard Industrial Classification for all economic activities. So this is how we categorize and measure the direct contribution of sports to the economy. It's in line with national standards and methodology, and that's what gave me the 0.05% of GDP that I mentioned earlier. It's not something that just because Nigeria has reclassified, we can just start changing the national methodology. That's why I mentioned there are direct and indirect ways of measuring sports contribution to the economy. So the direct way we are restricted to the United Nations System of National Accounts, as well as the International Standard for Industrial Classification and the Central Product Classification. Now we have to follow these rules when we are computing the direct impact of sports, and that can't change because Nigeria reclassified. So it's basically just in terms of direct computation, computing the direct contributions of sporting activities to GDP, the national economy, is basically just the gross value added of all resident producers of sport products at basic prices. It's really just the revenues minus the cost associated with the direct sporting event itself and the purchase of various sporting equipment and products. But what I believe, but when we want to understand the full impact of sporting activities on the economy, which is what the Honorable Minister mentioned earlier, we need to develop what is called a sports satellite account. Now, this goes beyond these direct contributions that I mentioned as specified by the United Nations System of National Accounts and the Industrial Classification and so on. It's the principal statistical framework for compiling and reporting the economic contributions of sports is the sports satellite account. And like I said, that goes beyond the direct contributions I mentioned under the GDP computations and reports. The first implication of the categorization of sport as a business activity is therefore to shift focus from the normal GDP reports to the production of this sports satellite accounts. That is where you would find the overall contribution of sports to the economy, and not in the 46 economic activities that we report on the direct contributions to GDP. So what is the sports satellite account? For those of us that are not familiar with it, it's essentially a robust statistical framework for measuring the economic importance of the sports industry. Within the framework of the national account, its aim is to estimate and provide statistical information on the economic significance of sports, of the sports sector and industry. Specifically, sport-related value added, production, and the number of persons employed directly and indirectly in the sports sector. So broadly speaking, preparing a sports satellite account for Nigeria would enable us to establish a baseline data for participation in and consumption of sports and related activities as businesses or economic activities. It will enable us to assess the contribution of the sports industry value chain to the economy and to identify key performance indicators and baseline data collection frameworks to aid the measurement of the impact of areas established as economic drivers in the sport industry policy. The first step, however, before we can develop the sports satellite account and measuring the total impact of sports on the Nigerian economy, is to first define sports. And I know it sounds very strange, but yes, we need to know exactly what we are classifying as a sporting as a sporting activity. Once we agree what constitutes sports, then measurements can follow and the sports satellite account can now be constructed. So in defining what is sports, looking at various case studies across the world, for example, a few European countries have constructed their sports satellite account under what is called the Vilnius definition of sport, which was adopted in 2007 and which identifies which categories or subcategories are fully or partly related to sports and the definitions to which they belong. So the term sport under this definition is comprised of three parts. The first, you have the statistical definition that's strictly comprised of sporting activities. The narrow definition, which includes all activities which are inputs to sports, that is all goods and services which are necessary for doing the particular sport, plus including the statistical definition, and then the broad definition, which includes all activities which require sport as an input. So you have your goods and services which are related to a sports activity, but without being necessary for doing that particular sport, plus the narrow definition I mentioned earlier. In the Nigerian case as well, there will be a need to determine and agree on formal definitions, including what sports are to be covered, as well as the scope of the intersectoral value chain linkages. And it's until we agreed on this, then we can now develop the sports satellite account. With respect to key sectoral performance indicators, broadly speaking, sports-related statistics will be generated from both administrative data as well as surveys of both households and establishments. For example, household expenditure related to sports will provide estimates which are compared with income or revenue generated by sports businesses or enterprises. More specifically, key indicators to be generated from households will include consumption, that is their spending patterns of the households on sports-related activities or products, or consumer spending on sporting activities, employment and job creation, which includes household employment involvement according to across the various economic activities. On the other hand, key indicators to be generated from commercial enterprises and business associations will include gross value added, basically revenues or earnings of businesses in sporting activities, which need to be computed in line with their sector groupings, gross capital formation, which is calculated from the input made by the dominant firms in various sporting activities, and then import and export, basically capturing international trade patterns and nature of goods and services with different countries related to sports. And then finally, what we already compute, which is the gross domestic product, which basically measures the market prices, considering the gross value addition of all resident producers of sports products at basic prices. MBA, like I said, MBS already has established its ability to do all this. It's just, like I said, just about ensuring that we have agreed what sporting activity should constitute, and then using the international standards and methodology, we go out and get the data, which is the easiest part as far as we are concerned. In terms of data sources, for gross value added of sporting activities, data sources are from activities of related businesses. This specifically applies to the use of corporate turnover figures, which form the basis of supply estimates for output, again at basic prices, and which is used to calculate gross value added for the sport economy, again in purchaser prices. Data for household consumption expenditure as well as labor force surveys provide final household consumption expenditure on various sport-related activities and services, and employment data for the sport economy respectively. Then, of course, we have government data, which is derived from the audited accounts at both the federal and state government level, while other sectoral data will continue to rely on the existing national accounts data generation processes that we already have well established at the NBS. In terms of frequency of the sports satellite account, again, that depends largely on the need of the user. There are some, it could be quarterly, it could be annually, it could be half yearly. It depends again on how often the data users are interested in the data. So that's not something that, I don't think there's any country that has any, countries differ. There are some that do this monthly, others that do it quarterly. I think the most frequently adopted frequency is quarterly, so that it matches the quarterly GDP publications.
Dr. Kale, are you rounding up? Because my producer here is laid 2 eggs when you were talking. Okay. Thank you very much. I don't want you to lay a 3rd egg while we're waiting. Okay.
Like I said, what is really needed for a successful compilation of the National Sports Satellite Account is essentially 3 things. 2 of which are already fully established. One is data integrity, which I believe already exists. Collaboration with relevant agencies, particularly the Ministry of Youth and Sports. We have collaborated with several agencies of government, NGOs, national government. Again, this is not a problem, something we do very effectively. And finally, and probably the most important aspect of it and the most challenging is probably ensuring the steady funding for this data to be computed. Until that is provided, it's going to be extremely difficult to actually get this data out and regularly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kele. So that last point is that we have to add you in the middle of this $500 million that we're looking for to inject into the system. Thank you, absolutely, particularly for shedding light on the sports satellite account system, which looks like something we're going to have to go into very, very quickly in the light of recategorization. Look, it's been a very, very interesting day, and I'm going to have to fly. We had a few questions. I've sent them to the panelists, and they're going to provide their answers, and we will drop them into the YouTube channel, or we'll drop them on, we'll drop our answers on the NESG platforms, so you could go in there and check for answers to your question. All the panelists have been sent the various questions that were asked, including the Honorable Minister. Once we get responses from all of them, we will definitely put them into Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and on the website for the summit. But I'm going to ask every single panelist, one after the other, starting from Chijioke, to just give us, you have 30 seconds to say to say final words each on this before I call on Dr. Iken Nwosu, our facilitator, the Tax Policy Commission of the NESG, to give us a summary, and then the vote of thanks will be taken by Mrs. Iruka Ndubuizu, the Head Sports and Entertainment Department, Delphi Law Advisory. So starting from you, Chijioke, just 1 minute final words on this whole exercise of recategorization of sports and its impact.
Yes.
Mike.
I reiterate that this is a momentous event, and that we all should be ready. Speaking for my own constituency, which is the legal profession, so that they're indispensable in this whole scheme of things. Our President Uluabata had mentioned it, that the lawyers, particularly the younger ones, could, carve a niche in this field. And moving forward, also, that for every business to thrive, there must be rule of law. So it's not only to talk about us generally, it's also an advocacy, because when the outcomes of illegal dispute are entirely unpredictable, then the business people will be wary in getting into that environment. So for the stakeholders, but with so much interest in this sector now, there will be less opacity. When you have more interest and transparency, the less likelihood of some unpredictable behavior, particularly even amongst the arbiters who inevitably, or who will be dealing with inevitable disputes, particularly when we expect that a lot of investments flow into this area. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Chijioke. Let me ask Francis Obi to give us his last 1 minute, to give us your last words on national sports federations and playing in this sector now that it has been recategorized.
Well, thank you very much, Nkechi. I want to say that this is a very huge opportunity. The recategorization of sports as business by the federal government. And it's not an opportunity just for sports stakeholders alone. It's for everybody. Everybody who has an inkling towards business. So you don't have to be a footballer to sell football boots and kits. Neither do you have to be a badminton player to manufacture rackets and sell badminton rackets. It's an opportunity that is open to all Nigerians, and it's a very huge one. So I would say that it's something we all need to, get ready for and get prepared and get equipped. Like the son said, I mean, in the legal aspect, you have to get trained in that sector. So there are so many things that is going to throw up and open up. You are going to need officials, technical officials. You are going to need coaches. You are going to need trainers. You are going to, all these people will have to be trained, and they are going to be engaged. and employed as far as, those sectors are concerned. So it's a huge opportunity, and I would say that it's a journey that has started, and I must commend the Honorable Minister for Youth and Sport Development for the way he has pursued this, both the policy and then the recategorization. And I know that by the time this is all sorted, it's going to be a major development for our sports in Nigeria. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francis. Can I ask Mrs. Arume Shekiri to give us, in terms of, you hear everybody talking, even talking about money, even Dr. Kale has quietly told us that he's going to need money to be able to help us to develop our models. Let's hear your last words on funding and investment. Thank you.
Thank you, Nkechi, for the opportunity, and thank you, NESG, for the invitation. We're very glad to be part of this session. We look forward to working with our partner banks in unlocking and making sure that this sector gets the funding that they require. We're $500 million. So we'll work with our partner institutions, commercial banks, as well as MFBs and non-financial institutions as well, to make sure that we push out funds that is required. So we look forward to further conversations around this. We hope it doesn't end here. We look forward to the next session that would involve most of our partner banks, so they can also bring their own perspective to the discussion. Thank you very much. It was such a great honor to be part of this distinguished panelist group of panelists, and I look forward to further discussions. Thank you, and have a blessed day, everyone.
And Dr. Kale, you were the last speaker, so you are the last person to give us, because I'll be giving the Honorable Minister's last words. He's just jumped on a plane. So he has craved my indulgence to allow me to give his last word. But let me ask Dr. Kale to just summarize for us what his day has been like. Dr. Kale,
you're muted.
You're muted. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I'll just end by saying what I usually say, that I believe that if we do the right things at the right time and for the right reasons and in the right way, Nigeria will be able to truly exploit its full potentials. And getting our sporting data right is one of those right things that we need to do, and do really quickly. And I'll just once again thank the organizers for inviting me to what I consider to be a very interesting webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kale. And it's now my pleasure to call Dr. Iken Nwosu, who has 2 to 3 minutes to round up his summary and give us his closing remarks before, right immediately, Mrs. Iruka Ndubuizu will give us the vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, Nkechi. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can. Go right ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Today is a very important day in the history of the sports industry in this country, and actually in Africa. There are 3 key things that we have as milestones. The first is that we have a national sports policy draft in place. Second is that we have achieved a recategorization of sports from recreation to an industry. And third is this important event we're having today as a pre-summit event. So these are 3 important milestones achieved this year. And why is more important to all of us in this room is that it is achieved in a year in which the African Continental Free Trade Area took effect when the 22nd signatory country signed it. Nigeria is the 53rd signatory because it pushes for free movement of goods, services, and persons. And that is going to give a boost. So the Honorable Minister's commitment to raise funding for this industry's growth is noted. The NBA President's commitment for the legal framework, training of lawyers, and dispute resolution mechanisms is also noted. Mr. Chijioke Okoli's confirmation that a specific sports industry dispute resolution process will be put in place is noted. Dr. Yemi Kale's confirmation that the sports industry is based so much on measurement and data as a critical precondition for the industry to leapfrog is very well noted. I'm quite happy and delighted that the sports spotlight account is now on the front burner. The Nigerian Olympic Committee's express commitment by Francis Obi that the sports federations are all committed to this process. They are going to restructure to be fit for purpose so that they can appropriately take part in the recategorization agenda and as implementers, as co-implementers for the sports industry policy is also noted. It's a very important commitment, including the commitment that they want to fund, they want to bring in as many major events into the country, sporting events, that will help to develop the value chain. Finally, Development Bank of Nigeria. Aroma made a very fantastic presentation, very concise. The commitment to fund is noted. And as Nkechi asked, we hope that the portfolio will be increased. The commitment for technical assistance and capacity building for the industry is noted against the background of the sports policy. Also, the commitment for partial guarantee, a result of which has said that a body should also be set up, just like was done by the CBN for the agricultural sector, is also noted. And the preparedness of Development Bank of Nigeria to partner the ministry and stakeholders to develop the sector also noted. So, in summary, we have everybody on board. This event is international. And even as I speak, we're getting messages from across the world that they're so happy that this is a turnaround for Nigeria. So, congratulations to everybody. I'm very, very proud as a Nigerian. And on the last note, what we are doing today is going to seriously give effect to the achievement of the African Union agenda, the African Union's agenda for the sports industry in every country. So I thank all the moderators, the moderator and all the panelists and the presenters for a fantastic session. Going forward, once the rapporteurs have given us the report of this event, be very sure that after the main economic summit, we are going to follow up to tie the loose ends, work with the ministry, work with every stakeholder, and get this right the way it's done in other countries. Nkechi, thank you very much for moderating, and everybody, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Doctor. So, on behalf of the Honorable Minister, who has asked me to thank everybody and to continue that the ministry is totally committed to this process and is willing, once this is over, to look at the report, look at the areas that we can all work together to drive this process to fruition. He's been very happy to work with us over the past 1 year and to see the progress that has been made in leaps and bounds. So it's my pleasure to now call Mrs. Iruka Ndubuizu, the head of Sports and Entertainment Department, Delphi Law Advisory, who have collaborated with us and the ministry and Petstone and Grace to put this together. Iruka, please give us the vote of thanks, after which we would all depart.
Thank you very much, Ms. Obi, and thank you to everybody that participated here today. We're grateful to be so part of this program. The underlying theme from all the panelists are a couple of things: employment, shift in mindset, having a framework for this to work, and education. So I think if we all do this, we're going to be on a path to begin to see business as a very, very viable sector, sports, as a very, very viable sector in the country. The key here, I believe, is a mindset shift, that we can move from seeing sports as entertainment into something that adds to Nigeria's GDP. Dr. Kale told us that we have less than 1% of the GDP. That's what sports brings to the table. But all the conversations here show that it could be more. Mr. Francis, broke it down very, very easily for us to see how we can begin to tap into this this platform. So thank you for everybody. Mr. Koli talked about the importance of having a proper dispute, well, not proper, but like a qualified dispute solving mechanism for sports issues. Mr. Akpata talked about the importance of having the expertise to handle this, the importance of having people, the capacity for lawyers to begin to specialize in this sector, that the days of the one-size-fits-all lawyer are over. So again, thank you all for being part of this. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Ms. Shakiri talked about the needing to understand this more, and just not just her, but a lot of people, this is news to them. This is the first time they're exposed to this topic. So the partnership has begun. These the panelists are all from different sectors. So this is the beginning of a big partnership in this sector. And hopefully we'll all learn together, we'll all educate each other together, and most importantly, find that money, that 500 million and 500 billion we talked about, begin to work together to get that money on the table, to do the good work, and most importantly, increase Nigerians' GDP, while also getting very, 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 very healthy in our country. Thank you all, and see you guys soon in other panel.
Thank you, Iruka, for everything. Thank you, my panelists. Thank you to everybody who listened to us today from far and near. And thank you to everybody who worked behind the scenes to put this together. It's been an incredible experience, and I'm sure we'll be calling you back soon. We never seem to have enough time to do these things, but I can assure you, after the summit this year, there will be a series where we will now have time to dive deeper into areas of sports as a business and turn around sports from pure recreation to a mindset that sees it as a critical economic sector of the economy.